Thanks, Stephen. And congratulations, everyone, on hanging around. It's bright and sunny outside, I believe, and drinks are on the way. We're not too far away from them. Just one moment. There we go. So some of you may have heard me speak yesterday, but very briefly, the National Growth Areas Alliance represents those fast-growing councils on the outskirts of our capital cities on mainland Australia. We don't have any Tasmanian councils who qualify, unfortunately, but we're looking at population growth at double the national average, and we're looking at designated growth areas, predominantly in those greenfield sites. 21 of those 31 councils are members of ours. Adrian looks after 537, so he's got a pretty big job in front of him. We have 21 members. We have a strategic partnership with the South East Queensland Council of Mayors that accounts for, I think, 4 or 5 of our growth councils, and the remaining are on my to-do list. So just a brief overview there. We're coming up to representing 5 million people, about a fifth of Australia's population live in growth areas, and we've got a significant workforce there of 2.21 million. But let's talk about transit-oriented development, or TODs. So I'm sure you all are aware of this term, but basically it is about using those transport hubs and developing around those transport hubs, both existing ones and new ones, to encourage people to use public transport. So we do that by encouraging people to live there, by building apartments and townhouses. And we locate vital services there so that people need to go and want to be close to these areas. And of course, along with health services, education, government and retail services, there are a lot of jobs that go with that. We found in some growth areas that new housing developments are built with a plan for a train station. Just a few weeks back, I was out with the 7:30 report filming an interview at a place called Lockerbie, which is about 25 k's north of Melbourne's CBD. And we stood on a partially made suburban road, and I could say on the left-hand side, within the next 15 years, there'll be 35,000 people living there. And then we turned and looked over to the right side, and it was the same situation, a new suburb called Cloverton, which is already being built, and again 35,000 people are expected to live there. That's going to happen very quickly. There's a plan for a train station at Lockerbie, but if experience is anything to show, that could be up to a 30-year wait. You know, a lot of people built and bought houses in new developments on the promise of the train station. Some of them in a place called Wollert, again in Melbourne's north. That was part of the brochure that said, come and live in Wollert, come and build your dream home in Wollert, because the train station's coming in 5 years' time. So that's now been placed on the Victorian government's 30-year priority list. So why don't we think about building around existing infrastructure as well? Here are just a few examples. I'll just run through a few images of different TODs. This one, is anyone here from Perth? Yep. So you know there's a lot going on with MetroNet at the moment. There's so much money being poured into rail, especially in Perth, and hopefully that flows onto bus services as well, because there's such a vital element in getting people to the stations. But this is in Coburn Central Station. You can see where the red building is in the back, and next to it in the background, that is the train station. And obviously these are all apartments and townhouses built right next door. There's like a market square, there's cafes, and there's a couple of other retail outlets there as well. So that's just one sort of example of, instead of building a train station way out in the middle of nowhere and expecting people to have to travel there, we're really increasing the densification of people who live nearby. Here's another one. This is just a plan at the moment for Mandurah, and that looks really different. You know, that doesn't look too suburban to me, but I think it will in the future, and I think it's just a great way to think about how we live as a society, as a community. So a few reasons why transit-oriented developments are really important in growth areas. One is they're going to help us fight congestion. So if we don't have to travel as far to get to the train station in the first place, that'd be fantastic. It won't cost as much to do all that travelling, and we won't lose as much time. We did some research recently on the census data from 2016, and we had a look at the cost and the impact on and the cost of living in an outer suburb. So we looked at Jordan Springs, which is a new suburb near Penrith in Sydney's west, and we found that someone living in Jordan Springs will spend around $109 a week just on fuel and car expenses, because predominantly they drive to work, and they're going to travel about 165 kilometres a week. So if you move into a middle ring suburb like Barala, that comes down to about $50 a week on travel. So obviously there's, a different distance people are travelling, but it's really having an impact on the hip pocket as well. So the more we can bring people in to live closer to transport, which makes it easier to get to work, the better. We also need to think about housing affordability and lifestyle affordability. And what we found in this census research is that the outer suburbs are really changing. The people who live there are changing. And as we all know, our lifestyles are changing as well. So the outer suburbs, I think the myth or the stereotype is that it's full of first home buyers and young families. There are still a lot of people in that situation moving to the outer suburbs, but interestingly, there are also, if you look at those two bottom dot points, there are a heap of older people moving to the outer suburbs. So empty nesters and retirees, and older workers and pre-retirees. Now we think there's probably something around wanting to be closer to their family. Perhaps if they're playing a role in childcare, grandparents need to live closer to the grandkids. They're able to sell their house in a middle or inner ring suburb and buy something really fantastic in the outer suburb, perhaps close to family. But when you have a look at that and you think of the stage of life, people are downsizing perhaps, how many of those categories are looking for something that's quite a long way from the shops, for a house that's quite a long way from the train station, that needs a lot of maintenance, that needs a garden and lots of time on the weekend spent gardening? I think as a society we're really shifting towards living in smaller townhouses and apartments, and transit-oriented developments are a really fantastic way to combine those with our new way of living, so living close to transport. This goes to show as well in the data that medium density dwellings, so that is townhouses or sort of small apartment blocks, they're the fastest growing type of house being built in Australia at the moment. We're really shifting towards that sort of lifestyle. So here are a few examples now from amongst our members of sort of transit-oriented developments that they're proposing. So you might know the city of Armidale in Perth. So Perth's population is going to increase by almost 60% between now and 2050 to about 3.5 million people. Now we need to bear in mind with that, it sounds like a lot, but we also need to bear in mind that all of the government projections didn't think we'd reach 25 million people as a country and for another 7 or 8 years. So we're well ahead of schedule. That's going to happen very quickly. Armidale has some low socio-economic areas and some significant areas of disadvantage. And part of that is the way the city itself is constructed, a train line down the middle, dividing one side of the tracks from the other. So something like this development, which is about putting the train line underground and then really developing that area, as you can see, with some office blocks, some retail and commercial government buildings, as well as apartments and townhouses, it's really going to transform that town. It's going to mean more people are living closer, they can walk to the services they need. There won't be as many problems with local transport. And it really is going to provide a lot of services and space and homes. So if we look at that, 18,000 jobs, 3,500 residential dwellings, enormous amount of commercial and office floor space. So that's really about removing the need for people to travel always into the CBD to pursue a career. We can encourage business to establish themselves in these outer areas with some fantastic facilities and transport right at the door. So another one is Werribee City Centre. Any Victorians here? No. So Werribee is really growing very rapidly. It's bigger than Geelong in terms of population, and in a few years' time it will be as big as the Gold Coast in terms of population. So what we need, what Werribee, the City of Wyndham is looking at doing, is connecting two zoned areas. So the blue there is the existing city centre, and that's quite an old suburb. It's based around the market gardens at Werribee South. It's quite an agricultural history. I grew up there, so it's got a plaque in the main street. No, it doesn't. And also a brand new employment precinct which has state government support called the Werribee Employment Precinct. Now there's already hospitals there, heaps of medical facilities, university campus. It's a really booming sort of place. But what's missing is transport connections between the two and encouraging residential areas, residential development within those areas. So what this proposal is looking at is bus lanes, bus stop connections to the new and proposed rail stations, making better use of existing infrastructure that's there, building around the existing train stations, and making sure we can leverage from state government investment in regional rail to connect people from all over the state to this area. And finally, I'll just run through, we heard this morning a bit of talk about the Sydney Metro Northwest. Now, this is a really good example, I think, of how transit-oriented development is changing the face of suburbs. This is the current state, I think, fairly current state of the Castle Hill station. Now, this is just one example of a number of stations being built in that development. And what we've seen is the number of development applications for residential dwellings within 800 metres of the train station has doubled. And by the time it opens, that council is expecting 80% of all their planning applications for residences to be within 800 metres of the train station. So the days of, the big block and having to drive 5 kilometres to the station are pretty much over. People are really going to be living right on top of the station. Look, I know we're running a bit short of time, so I'm happy to leave it there. I know Stephen's got some great examples to run through as well in Victoria. So we do have all of our research on our website, so please have a look or come and have a chat afterwards. I'd love to share some more examples with you. Thanks.